Konnichiwa, this is the Shogunstein, and this is a historical background of the new game we just got off the Amazon called Nippon Zaibatsu, the new edition. And this is the Emperor's edition. Here you got a nice map of Japan for your board. We got our rule book. We've been going through the rule book. Again, this is the Emperor's edition. Obviously, the Shogunstein would rather have a Shogun's edition, but we got the Emperor's edition, fancy bits. Lots of stuff. The box didn't even barely close. There was so much stuff here, so this is some of the fancy bits. And then we got a bag. What's in the bag? We got a lot of stuff to punch. We got our player boards. We got player handbook. We got a lot of things to get ready for this game. And then, it's a pretty heavy game. So we got some rules to learn. We've been watching some videos. So we'll get to the actual gameplay and maybe a closer look at the components later. What I'd like to do is give a historical background of what's going on here as this game deals with the theme of industrializing Japan. In the middle of the 19th century, Japan finally realized how far behind in the West it was in terms of economy, industry, and technology. So the Shogunstein, when he's not a YouTube star, does have a side hustle in history. So let's talk a little bit about the historical background here. So Japan was typically ruled by an emperor. But by the time we get to the Sengoku period, the emperor is more of a figurehead, and you had various daimyo competing to become the shogun to unify Japan, which culminates in 1600 with Tokugawa Ieyasu emerging as the leader of Japan. We came close with Oda Nobunaga, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, but it's the Tokugawa family, Ieyasu, who unifies Japan after the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600. And then 1614, 1615 puts down a potential Toyotomi family uprising out of Osaka Castle, which I visited this summer on a bucket list tour with my buddy Hideo. Got to see the Osaka Castle battle. But by 1615, the Tokugawa family is clearly in charge. So the feudal system in Japan had, again, the emperor as a figurehead. It had the shogun as the real ruler. You had various daimyo, who would be like the European lord. You had the samurai, which would be like the European knight. You have peasants, which would be like the serfs. What's going to be different about Japanese feudalism, who's on the bottom? Below the peasants are the merchants. The merchants were considered lower than the peasants because the merchants did business with the gaijin, the foreigners. They did business in Nagasaki, which was one of the only places left open for foreign trade. Because when the Tokugawa family unifies Japan, they're going to isolate Japan, and Japan will be isolated for over 250 years, missing out on things like the Industrial Revolution. So the Tokugawa ruled, shogun ruled. The samurai really didn't have much to do. It was relatively peaceful after all the fighting of the Sengoku period. Then in 1853, as the United States becomes maybe more imperialistic, depending on your view, Commodore Perry and what's known as the Black Ships, the U.S. Navy that has coal, steam power, which the Japanese had never seen because Japan had been isolated. So in 1853, July, Commodore Perry, Townsend Harris, and the U.S. Navy show up off the coast of Japan, off the Izu Peninsula, and force Japan to open for trade. Treaty of Kanagawa is signed in 1854, about a year later. 1853, Commodore Perry, the U.S. Navy shows up. Japanese had never seen a modern Navy before. There was very limited trade and cultural diffusion as Japan was isolated from, again, about the unification of the Tokugawa family in 1600-ish to Commodore Perry showing up in 1853. Treaty is signed that forces Japan to open for trade. They didn't want to open for trade. They didn't want to be imperialized by the U.S., but the Japanese realized that they were, technology-wise, they would have been no match for the modern U.S. Navy. You can look at pictures of Commodore Perry's black ships from the Japanese perspective, and again, the coal, the black from the coal dust, the steam, and those ships are drawn like monsters. So the Japanese hadn't seen that technology, so they had to open for trade. But very quickly they realized it's time to industrialize. It's time to copy and do what the Westerners have done, the United States, the British. So Japan, with the opening by force and not wanting to open, with Commodore Perry and the U.S. Navy showing up, is going to start the modernization process. Now, that group at the bottom, the merchants, they don't want to be on the bottom. They have money, but they don't have prestige. They don't have, they're not treated, with respect. So it's going to be out of that merchant class that's on the bottom of Japanese feudalism that after 260 something years of Tokugawa rule, in 1868, the merchants will lead a revolt or the restoration of the emperor to power, the Meiji Restoration, which takes place in 1868. And that really amplifies Japan's industrialization and modernization, which is going to be which is really the theme of this game. So once you have the Meiji Restoration, Japan will start to industrialize. Now, if you know Japanese geography and you know that it's 1,000 islands, 4 main islands, very mountainous, not a lot of resources. So in order to industrialize, Japan is going to have to imperialize. And that's going to lead us on the road to World War II. And just how quickly does Japan modernize? Well, again, in 1853, they had never seen a modern steam-powered Navy ship. But by 1941, Japan is modernized enough that aircraft carriers with Mitsubishi Zeros could reach Hawaii and take out much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. And at least by the Battle of Midway, was winning World War II in the Pacific. So this game deals with the Daibatsu, that Japanese business corporation organization, the modernization of Japan. We're going to be building factories. We're going to be modernizing Japan. So that's a look at the Meiji Restoration and the historical background of the game Nippon, the new edition, Emperor's Edition. This is the Shogunate out.